The title of the sermon for today is From Bitter to Better, a journey from brokenness to restoration. Are you bitter or are you better? How many of you know the story of Ruth? Somebody actually is named Ruth here. How many of you have taken the time to read this very interesting book in the Bible? I find this book very interesting for 3 reasons. Una, the book of Ruth is one of the only 2 books in the Bible that is actually named after a woman. Do you know the other one?
Yes.
Esther. Yes. And another interesting thing about Ruth is that, or the book of Ruth, is that Ruth's words of loyalty to her mother-in-law, Naomi, have actually been quoted many times in marriage vows and ceremonies. Allow me to read the Tagalog version of what Ruth said to her mother-in-law. Huwag po ninyong hilingin iwanan ko kayo. Hayaan na ninyo akong sumama sa inyo. Saan man kayo pumunta, doon ako pupunta. Kung saan kayo tumira, doon din ako titira. Ang inyong bayan ang magiging aking bayan. Ang inyong Diyos ang magiging aking Diyos. Kung saan kayo mamamatay, doon ako mamamatay at doon din ako malilibing. Parusahan sana ako ni Yahweh ng pinakamagbigat na parusa kung papayagan kong magkalayo tayo maliban na lamang kung paghiwalayin tayo ng kamatayan. Wow. Have you ever heard those vows? And of course, who could forget the very interesting love story of Ruth, the Moabite widow, to Boaz, a Jew. We don't know if he's single, if he's married. But if you're interested, and if you have time later, basahin niyo po ang Book of Ruth. 4 chapters lang naman. It's a very wonderful book that has so many insights that we can get. But did you know that the Book of Ruth actually opens or begins in a very tragic way. Pinakita po doon sa chapter 1 ng Ruth ang iba't ibang mga pangyayari, masakit, tragic events that happened in the life of Naomi. Allow me to share them with you. Una, kinailangan na umalis sila sa kanilang hometown na Bethlehem dahil kung manatili sila doon, she and her family would die. So they had to make a very difficult decision of leaving their hometown and traveling to a strange land. And in this strange land, syempre, there were strange people, there were strange customs. And I believe it was easier for them to adapt to the strange land dahil magkasama-sama sila bilang isang pamilya. But one day, namatay ang asawa ni Naomi. And after a few years, namatay din ang kanyang 2 anak na lalaki. Leaving her with 2 other widowed women who had no sons themselves. Now, why is this tragic, mga kapatid? Kasi in the time of Naomi, to be widowed and barren, not having any children, meant living in a very vulnerable state of poverty, shame, and even helplessness. Kumbaga, 50-50 na po ang buhay mo kapag mawalan ka ng asawa at wala ka pang anak. Ang tanging pag-asa mo lang is if someone of your next kin would actually choose to marry you and take you in. Very sad, very tragic, ang reality ni Naomi and Ruth. They had to face one loss after another, which left them poor and vulnerable and without a choice. However, if you keep reading this story, you will realize that this was only the beginning of their story. And by chapter 4, you will realize that God had a very different ending in mind for them. So, as we continue to unpack the stewardship call of brokenness sa atin at those around us and even in the world today, I'd like us to learn some life-giving truths seen in this beautiful story. A story that is a journey from bitterness, a journey from being bitter to being better, a journey with God from brokenness to restoration. I don't know about you, but when I thought about this theme of brokenness, naisip ako, kailangan ba talaga i-steward ang brokenness? But then I got this thought, yes, we do. Because brokenness is a reality of every one of us. And we cannot begin our journey of stewardship if we do not first acknowledge that we are all broken and that we have forgotten to be God's good and faithful stewards. And so today I'd like to remind us that even in our brokenness, we can carry out God's call of stewardship. Firstly, by remembering that in our brokenness, we can journey from brokenness to restoration when we remember that God is working even when we don't see it or feel it. Now, there's a popular hymn that has the following chorus. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. The verse goes, "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, just to know, thus saith the Lord." Do you know the title of this hymn? It's "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus." Tunay nga po. This is a beautiful song, a beautiful hymn, not only because mabilis siyang kantahin, very easy in melody niya, but it carries with it a very sweet and comforting message. The message that says we can trust Jesus. That when Jesus is with us, He is there to comfort us when we are down, when we are burdened. Jesus will be there with us and will never leave us until the end. This song reminds us that when life gets rough, that when life gets rough and the burdens we face seem to overwhelm us, it's wonderful to know that we can bring them all to Jesus. And we know that He will take care of us and will make a way where there seems to be no other way. Yet, has there ever been a time in your life, in our lives, when we have felt that it was just so hard to trust Jesus? That it was just so hard to take Him at His word and to rest on His promises that He will never leave us, that He will never forsake us? Has there ever been a time that mga pangyayari po sa buhay natin broke us into a million pieces and we just didn't know if we could survive? Was there ever a time in our lives that we were so broken that we didn't think we could keep on living? Or maybe we thought, ano pa ba ang gagawin ko? How will I pick myself up from this brokenness? Have you ever felt so broken, kapatid, that even knowing that Jesus would always be there for you, or that God is the mender of broken hearts, these were just empty promises? How many of us in our brokenness question God's goodness, question God's love? Have you ever felt like your life was just full of endless hope, a hopeless end, instead of having endless hope? Alam po ba natin that another very interesting thing about the book of Ruth is that it is one of the books in the Bible that doesn't explicitly mention God's involvement in the whole 4 chapters of its narrative. God here seems to be absent or silent sa mga pangyayari sa buhay ni Ruth and Naomi. God seemed to be just in the background. Parang wala lang sa kanya that these 2 women had to face tragedy and heartache. Can we relate? Looking back, or thinking about itong mga pangyayari na nangyari kay Naomi and Ruth, these thoughts came to my mind. Tinanong kaya ito ni Naomi and Ruth sa Panginoon, bakit nangyari ito sa akin? What did I do to deserve this? Or maybe they also asked, pinaparusahan ba ako ng Diyos? Hanggang kailan ko ba dadanasin to? Or maybe they also asked, bakit ang bigat-bigat at ang sakit-sakit? Mahal ba talaga ako ng Diyos? I'm sure one time or another, they may have said, ayoko na, tama na, suko na ako. One thing is for sure, mga kapatid, Naomi felt so bitter about what happened to her that she chose to change her name